So good morning, everyone. Buongiorno. My name is Rebecca Irvin of ROLEX. I've been asked to make a brief introduction to what is called the ROLEX Mentoring Lecture. I'd like to thank Sir David Chipperfield and the Biennale for organizing this talk about mentoring in architecture. ROLEX has a mentoring program in the arts called the Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative. And this is pairing established masters with young talents for a year of a creative collaboration. We're doing this in the fields of dance, film, music, literature, theater, and visual arts. And we're here at the Biennale to announce that the architecture is going to be a separate discipline and a separate mentorship. And this morning earlier, we announced, and we're very honored, that Sejima-san is going to be our first official architecture mentor. And I'm going to hand over to Ulrich Obrist, who's a great friend of the ROLEX mentoring program. He's been one of our advisors, one of our nominators. He's the co-director of the Serpentine Gallery. And many of you would have seen him 2 years ago. He had a wonderful installation with all of his interviews with many different artists all over the world. So we're very pleased to have him moderating this discussion. So I'll hand over to him. Thank you.
As Rebecca said, it's actually the occasion is the ROLEX and actually Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative, and the appointment of Kazuyo Sejima, named as the first ROLEX architecture mentor. There was an architect before involved. Actually, everything had started with Alvaro Siza almost 10 years ago. He was the first art mentor as an architect, and Alvaro Siza, unfortunately, cannot be in Venice this week, but we're very, very excited to have this conversation today about this topic. What I thought is that we maybe start with a few questions to each of the participants. We have Kazuyo Sejima and David Chipperfield with us, who both are actually have developed visions for the Architecture Biennale. Kazuyo Sejima 2 years ago and David Chipperfield this year, so it will be very interesting to hear them talk about this idea of mentorship. And we have actually with Alison Crawshaw, one of the participants in David's exhibition, who will talk about her project here. And with Sahel Al-Hiyari, we have an architect who was the first actually protégé under the mentorship of Alvaro Siza. So a very warm welcome to all four of them. Now, David, I thought to begin with the beginning, I wanted to ask you about this idea of mentorship for you, and who were your mentors when you started at the beginning? If you could tell us a little bit about your beginnings and how you came to architecture.
Well, I think when you start studying, you know, you really don't know what you're entering when you start to study architecture. And I think there's, you know, the first teachers that you have, I think are really critical. And I have fond memories of some of my early, teachers, people like David Dunster, who was teaching me at Kingston, you know, very encouraging. But then I think from then on, I would say that, you know, I have different mentors for different things. You know, one is fortunate to have bumped into certain people who are teachers, who know how to inspire you from the position of teaching, and then you bump into other people who are just practitioners, and you learn in a more, you learn through proximity or inspiration more than instruction. I was very fortunate to have a very good teacher who was an architect, Patrick Hodgkinson, and a good old-fashioned modernist. He worked for Alvar Aalto and just showed me architecture for 2 years. And on the other hand, you know, your formative years don't stop when you come out of college. So I was very fortunate to work for Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, people like this, and you learn a lot from these people. And I would say, you know, there's a number of people in my autobiography that really inspired me. I would say Raphael Moneo, I was fortunate to meet early in my career. And, you know, he shows a model of architectural position in terms not only of his work, but his dedication to teaching, to writing, to seeing architecture as a cultural, more than just a commercial activity. I mean, that was inspirational. I worked for Richard Rogers, and again, Richard inspired me in other ways. I think he's someone that really believes in sort of.
Now, maybe the topic, because yesterday we spoke to Richard Sennett and we spoke about the common ground and your whole idea and vision for this Biennale, and Richard Sennett told me about your conversations, and obviously to which extent the notion of the common ground is always also related to collaboration. And I suppose the theme of collaboration is also very interesting in terms of mentorship, because mentorship very rarely is a one-way thing. It's usually a reciprocity thing. It's a true collaboration where both sides kind of learn. So I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about this whole idea of collaboration and the common ground, and how it all started with this topic for this year's Biennale. What was the epiphany?
Well, I always believe, I mean, I think most architects are concerned with this issue, which is that, architecture, while architects have a great responsibility and a lot of, responsibilities put on our shoulders, in a way we cannot operate singly. I mean, we can't, Kazuyo can't wake up one night and say, I'm going to design a school, and, it doesn't happen. We need, architecture is probably the most collaborative of all activities. When you, at the end of any big project, and if you lined everybody up who worked on that project, from the professional team through the contractors, through the client, the local administration that gave you the permissions, and it's an enormous army of people that have to buy into that vision. And if architecture is only confrontation, which it often is, confrontation with circumstances, confrontation with contractors, then you're lost. I mean, I think most architects would say that the best projects they've done is when, everybody on the boat is trying to go in the same direction from diverse concerns. It's not like you can't do a project well just by everyone saying, look, you've got a great idea, don't worry about the budget, don't worry about the time, do whatever you want. I mean, that's not common ground. Common ground is, I'm here to do this, I'm here to do that, and I've got a very different opinion to you, and I've got a very different. Common ground is the idea that from those different opinions, you've got one common ambition, or you're united by common concerns. So my idea for common ground was twofold. One was that architects should discuss amongst themselves better those things that they share, instead of the Biennale being a sort of competition between talents. There's a problem that if you ask 50 architects to show their work, all of us want to show our work better than the other, So if you're not careful, it's just a competition of projects and a competition of talents.
And you mentioned the dialogue Kazuyo has with the fisherman, and that's maybe a wonderful transition, actually, because that ties in also, Kazuyo, with the project you have for the ROLEX mentoring program, because having been invited to be the mentor of architecture, your immediate first idea was actually to bring in this project of House for All, which has to do with the post-tsunami situation, and also with a dialogue with your mentor, Toyo Ito. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about this idea.
The House for All?
Yeah.
So after tsunami, the 5 architects, Japanese architects, included Toyo Ito, we started to try to find something what we can do for the people. And then normally all infrastructure has gone, so the government only invited the civil engineer how to make the road or how to make the property, because that area is very beautiful area, and then all the people are basically living the beach. And there are so many mountains, and but foot of the mountain there are many beaches, and then many houses are gone, and then now the people lost the property, I mean the ground, to live. So the government decided that the beach is a dangerous area to live. So first government or they must start to make the land bit higher area. And so it takes long time to get the house, the end, maybe 5-6 years. So this period, the people, many people must leave the temporary houses. And temporary houses are very small and also very temporary. So the government never expect architects can do something. So we started as a kind of, from our side, there are no clients, but to visit the many places and to start communicate. And then we thought maybe they need some, even the very small space, but the people can gather and to talk, and gradually we hope they discuss about the future village by themselves. At least they need space, and we believe the space can work. And so first, one side we started to ask the many companies from all over the world to support us. And the other hand, we also asked the many students or architects to send us the sketches. The first we started the thing, and then also we immediately started some exhibition of the sketches. But at the same time, we try to find a place to make a real house for all, which is basically around 30 square meter and just a one-room space. But in there, the people can talk, because if go commute these areas, the people has only the very small house. So sometimes some relative or some friend come to visit house, come to them, but there is no space to enter. So just they talk the outside, and it's also pity. But also in the temporary houses, suddenly people must move. So that means that they don't have so much communication. But if there is some space to open to everybody, that it's encourage people to start communicate, to think about their future.
Alison Crawshaw. David, I was curious how you discovered Alison's work, because I think it was in Rome, no?
How what, sorry?
I was just wondering how David discovered your work.
Oh, I did the Prix de Rome a year ago, and following sort of 3 months research and interviews with the master planners, urbanists in the city, I decided that there was an exhibition and a show at the end of the residency, and I decided to sort of translate that work rather than through diagrams and drawings and more conventional sort of writing and ways of describing the research project. I decided to make an installation with a man sitting over there from Rome, and to make a film. And I think that when David saw the project, I assume, that the subject matter of my work, which is illegal building in Italy, kind of fit with the concept of common ground, and also the fact that I'm sort of British and my work was about Italy, so it kind of fit with the concept of the show, but also the way that I had translated it into something which was experiential, which tried to engage a public, and which was sort of architectural, but talking about an urban condition. I would have thought that's why you selected it, David, but I'm not sure.
Well, Kieran Long and Jaffer brought your work to my attention, and I think you explained it very well. I think there's a lot of very interesting work going on, but then the question is, how do you communicate that? And I think Alison had found this very convincing way of, both doing research and actually, in a way, finding a way of explaining that through a more scenographic manner, as well as but there was, it seemed to me a very, and I think it is, if you see the work, I think it's a very convincing project, and it has depth in terms of the research work, and also it addresses this idea of communicating, and I think that's why it's such a good project for the Biennale.
Now, all of this, also this idea of what you said earlier, that there is maybe no hierarchy, but there's a reciprocity in, mentorship, brings us to Sahel Al-Hiyari, who was actually the protege of the mentor Alvaro Siza. And Sahel, I was just wondering, it would be great to hear from you about this, at the moment when Kazuyo Sejima is about to start her mentorship. It would be great to hear from you as the first, protege in the ROLEX. How was this experience, and how was your dialogue with Alvaro Siza?
Well, it was, I mean, again, I always refer to the first time I met Alvaro, and it was in his, in Porto, in his office, the office he designed in a very smoky room. We were chain smoking, and the conversation sort of went from techniques of insulation to the politics in the regions of the Middle East. And I think what happened during this period is that it helped me sort of articulate a method or an approach of practice in the context where I practice. I practice in the Middle East, and of course, it is a context which is very challenging. It has a lot of, the conditions that surround architecture are not very favorable. Most of the time, the processes of construction, of architecture, they're substandard. There's a lot of building, but there isn't really a lot of architecture. And so what was very interesting when I worked with him was this idea of maintaining all of these factors as something internal to the architecture process and to the design process, and something that would become later on a strategy in the work, something that is internalized. And I think in a way that is also, he found similarities of probably where I'm working with the kind of problems he was facing at a certain point in his career early on. And so what I got out of it eventually, I mean, is not quantifiable, but what I see is, and this unfolds as I practice, is this idea of maintaining sort of the initial impulse of architecture, or let's say the intuitive process of architecture, maintaining it in balance with the other factors that shape it that are not necessarily related to the author. So, and I think that comes beautifully in his work, where it is poetic, at the same time it is very real, and it addresses real conditions. So I think this is a kind of dynamic we had. It was very hands-on. It was very. It had a lot of varied, and it was multifaceted. We could discuss the potentials of structural design, the architectural and spatial potential of structural design, and then talk about light as a building material, and then go back to how builders build in Portugal or in Jordan. And I think these layers were very important they were an important, I think, lesson for me to internalize and to maintain throughout my practice.
Thank you so much. Many, many thanks to Kazuyo, to David, to Alison, to Sahel, to you all, and also to Jaffa. Thank you so much.